we'll move on to visual end-to-end testing. So curious for the audience, anyone know what visual testing is? Basically ensuring that your application at a certain point in time, a screenshot of a page, or it could be even a component, looks exactly how you want it to look, right? So if you, for example, think of google.com, you can capture that screenshot on Chrome and Safari, and then that saves it as your baseline. And then every execution at a future point will compare your new test execution to your baseline, and it'll check for visual differences. But visual testing has gotten a lot smarter over the last, I would say, 5 or more years, where before it used to be a pixel-to-pixel comparison. Now almost nobody does that. People now do it in a much smarter way. And so I'll show you guys that solution, but it's a really good way to do visual checks of either entire pages or components. Before, what we used to see was a lot of individuals would maybe pull up a page and start checking whether URLs exist, whether buttons exist, and stuff like that. You no longer need to do that because you can now just open a page and basically render the entire page and do hundreds or even thousands of validations with like a few lines of code, which is why visual testing is really nice. It's also really fast because you don't have to execute so many functional tests. Instead, you just check the baseline to the actual results and then decide at that time whether the new changes are bugs or are they requirements changes. Here's the workflow that is typical for visual end-to-end tests. So a test will run, the commands are called, the screenshots are rendered across different browsers and resolutions. So one other thing visual end-to-end testing is really good for is cross-browser, cross-platform testing, right? Let's pretend you have a responsive web app. Visual testing is really good for that because you can just open up multiple pages and then render them on all of your most important devices, browsers, operating systems, and make sure that everything looks as it's supposed to look. So then the screenshots are compared against the baseline. If changes are detected, as a user, this is a manual step that we have to perform. We either have to decide if those changes are relevant and are a bug, or if they're not relevant, then they're potentially a requirements change, or we can ignore certain changes. And so that's what we're doing here. So I recommend just pull down, continue to working through our pulled down repository here. And then we'll take a look at this chapter, Visual End-to-End Testing Chapter 8. We'll continue working with the same exact test that we set up in Chapter 2, but now we will add Screener to it. So Screener is our visual end-to-end testing tool. So the configuration for it is all here. And once it's ready, there's only a few little changes that are required to make it work. We still navigate to a URL like we used to do before with our WebdriverIO tests. So this is one of the reasons why we're showing you guys WebdriverIO primarily, is because this does only work for WebdriverIO or any other programming language supported by Selenium WebDriver, or there's also visual component testing as well. That'll work for any like Angular or React applications, which is a little bit different than visual end-to-end testing. But so then once you open up your URL, you'll use the visual init command that will tell the test that it's a visual test. And then you'll capture a snapshot of the page whenever it's rendered and give it a name. So I'll show you guys that in live as well. Let's take a look here. Here's that example of exactly the test that we've been working with. And let me close all of this so it's not so messy. So here's the exact test that we've been working with. I'm putting a pause here because it's really good to make sure that our page actually loads here, right? Because we got to think of these as different tests from, functional tests or unit tests and so on. These are visual tests. And so here, the most important thing is to make sure that a page is fully rendered. And then here, just saying, this one is my React Redux app, right? And this page is called the global feed page. Here, I'm pulling up another page. capturing a snapshot called the sign-in page. And then here, we're going to the register URL and capturing another snapshot. Okay, so that's one test. And then the very powerful thing about it, again, right, it's a responsive web app that we want to see in multiple different browsers and configurations. And so we can point it to multiple different devices, right? Like here, for example, I'm pointing it at Chrome on this specific viewport size, because this is 28% of the usage in the world. So the #1 most used viewport size for browsers is, then I have #2, and so on and so forth, right? And then I get into like iPhone X, iPhone 6 through 8, and then I get into the Android resolution. And so that's just the one test, and we can run it across all of those platforms. So let's do that. And then we just do npm test like normal. Let me show you guys my packages JSON, what the npm test does. That's all it does. Am I in the right one? Yeah, that's all it does. And so now it's good because we've updated our configuration. It's going to run in Screener. Come back here, log in. So here you can see it running. We've got a brand new build that started. And here you can see it's showing me that there's 5 screens that have changed and the 10 that have previously been accepted. So we can come here and see. There's no new ones. 10 accepted. These are the ones that we've previously executed. If you're running it for the first time, you would need to decide, for example, what do you want to do with this screen on Chrome 88, Windows 10, and this resolution? Is this acceptable to you or not? And so if it is, you set it as a baseline. But here's some ones that changed that are a little bit more interesting to look at. So this has changed. And so here it shows previously accepted and the current. And you can see it's highlighting some changes here that we can see. And if we come back here, here's the DOM snapshotting that actually happened. So here it's saying that there used to be this tag that was now added. Here, for example, it's saying there used to be this text that was now replaced with another text, and so on and so forth. And so with these changes, this website is actually really nice for this because it's super dynamic. So you can decide actually what matters here. You can decide through the UI, for example, that all of these random changes don't matter, or you can decide that they are bugs and report them to your team. And you can also do this programmatically where you ignore certain areas that are not relevant. For example, maybe the amount of pages here would constantly keep increasing, right? Or maybe you have like a date field that is constantly updated. You can programmatically just ignore that entire element, and then the screener will not worry about whether it's changed or not. So it's just, that's a part of configuration that you kind of have to play around with your application to do and see. And ultimately, let's say that this change is acceptable for us, and we say that everything here that's changed is a requirement, we're okay with it, so you accept it, and so now every future execution of this test on this configuration here will check against this new baseline, which is this one. We now said this one is the right one. And so then that's a nice thing, again, powerful thing about it is that you can see we've had the one test. It opened up multiple URLs, right? It's checking our global feed. It's checking our sign-in page. It's checking our sign-up page. And it's doing it across multiple different resolutions. So here's all the different devices and resolutions that we did it against.
What Nikolay just showed is visual end-to-end tests, which is one part to use visual comparison to test your web apps, but different way that is also pretty common in the market is to visual component testing. And someone has mentioned chromatic, which is almost similar to what Source Visual also provides, where there's a test runner that goes through all your storybook components and makes screenshots of them. So you can test your individual components directly for every build that you have. So that is the different way of how you can use Source Visual by using the format screener runner, which allows you to, which detects your storybook components and runs the tests automatically for you.